Good evening, everybody. We have different times on all the different clocks, but my phone says 6 o'clock, so we'll make a start. First of all, welcome back. It's September. If you've managed to be lucky enough to get away on a break, hope you've had an enjoyable summer. And we begin with item 1. Apologies. Do you have any? Ranjit's going to be a little bit late.
I know I'm going slightly deaf in one ear, but I've noticed over the last sort of 8 months that certainly the PA system is not as good as it used to be. There's like an echo, and we can hardly hear you, even when your microphone's on. I asked David to look at it, and he hasn't come back to me. I don't know what the problem is or what's changed over recent months, but it's difficult to hear.
No. Well, if people can speak up, please, if you're speaking, so that Martin can make out exactly, and the rest of us, exactly what's being said.
Well, if I can ask, can we look at it again? When I speak now, it's quite clear. When people are speaking from the front, it's not clear.
Okay, we'll bear that in mind. Thank you, Martin. Ranjit's going to be a few minutes late. Other than that, we don't have any other apologies. Late items, we do have one late item, which you'll see it's marked as item XX for the exempt part of the meeting, so hopefully that's been distributed to councillors and cabinet members. There are no petitions. Identification of urgent items to which call-in will not apply. There are none. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No. Okay. Minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of July. Everyone okay with those? Councillor Bolton. They're all okay? Yeah. Lovely, those are agreed. Item 7, recommendations from the Executive Scrutiny Board. We'll deal with those as we go along, as we normally do, item by item. So we move on then to the key decisions, and item 8, which is proposal to merge Brackensdale Infant and Brackensdale Junior School to form a primary school. And that's Councillor Russell, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Repton, can you hear me okay? Wonderful. Okay. This issue has been in the pipeline for quite some time. There's been extensive consultation with local residents in the area, and particularly, obviously, parents of the young people that attend both Brackensdale Infant and Junior schools. The recommendation before Cabinet tonight is a proposal to merge Brackensdale Infants and Juniors into one all-through primary. This isn't a new policy. This is a policy that this Cabinet has approved in the past. There's extensive evidence to suggest that these types of schools serve the young people better in terms of continuity and familiarity, rather than changing schools from the infant to juniors. Importantly, Chair, I'd like to point out that of the residents that responded, 90% expressed support for the proposals that we are putting forward this evening. So we have the support of the vast majority of the parents of the young people that attend the school. And for the reasons that I've outlined already, I'd like to propose that to Cabinet tonight. In terms of the recommendations from the Scrutiny Board, I note that they requested that the Children and Young People's Board monitor and review the SEN and budget concerns, as they put them, at a future meeting following the school's merger. I'd like to just reassure Cabinet that in particular there's an enhanced resource at Brackensdale that supports children with special educational needs. We are assured by the school and the staff that there will be no ill effects to that support provided to those young people at the school in conjunction with this merger. So that is not a concern for me. I'm reassured by that. And in addition, I'm satisfied in terms of the funding element for the school that there'll be no adverse effect on the school's overall budget as a result of that merger. In the financial and value for money implications at the back of the report at 1.2, it details the specifics of that around the slight reduction in overall funding formula as a result of the two schools merging, but that is significantly offset by the fact that one of the head teachers will obviously be replaced and there will be one head teacher for the whole school. So there's no ill effects as far as I'm concerned in terms of the SEN implications or the financial implications, but clearly subject to the agreement of the chair and vice chair of the CYP Scrutiny Board, I've got no concerns in them monitoring that as requested by the Executive Scrutiny. So in that case, Chair, obviously happy to take any questions, but I will put the recommendations to Cabinet as printed, please.
Thank you, Councillor Russell, and thank you for that reassurance around the points that were raised by the Scrutiny Board last night. Are there any questions or comments for Councillor Russell on this one? Councillor Skelton, please.
Thank you. I very much welcome this policy. It's been the Council's policy for a number of years. I'd really just wanted to ask, it doesn't always happen with every school or where there's an infant and junior school, say, side by side or just round the corner from each other. When one head retires, it doesn't automatically happen. I can think of some circumstances where governing bodies, for their own reasons, decided they didn't want to go through. Does the Council have any way of persuading? Because it really is a good thing to do. It is good for the children. I just wondered.
I don't know, Councillor Russell or Andy, if you're able to respond to that.
Yes, thank you for your question, Councillor Skelton, and thank you for your support of this item. As we do know, following the merger, prior to the merger taking place, there has been the retirement of one of the head teachers of one of the schools. So we don't envisage there being an issue in terms of that merger happening and the agreement of both schools to have one single head teacher. In terms of any persuasion or enforcement powers that the Council has, I'm not entirely sure that there are, but I don't envisage any issues with that arising. Andy Smith may want to add more to that, but that's my perspective. Okay, thank you. I think it is a process of cooperation rather than coercion, and if the governing bodies of the relevant schools want to take it forward, then it will happen, and if for some reason there's an objection from the governing bodies, then I guess that's the circumstances when they don't proceed, but it's worthwhile taking on board those comments, and I'm sure as you say, the policy is a good one and beneficial to the children and young people, so wherever possible we do encourage it, and I'm sure officers do use their persuasion to try and encourage that. Okay, so the recommendation is to approve the publication of the statutory notice. So that goes to the next stage of consultation, and then I guess the final decision will come back here again once that consultation's taken place. Councillor Russell. Sorry, Chair. I should have actually made clear when I made the recommendations earlier. Apologies for that. What we'd also like to please ask the permission of Cabinet to do, because we don't expect any further issues arising as a result of that consultation, I'd like to ask that the final decision on the merger, that delegated authority is given to the Strategic Director of People's Services to make that final decision, to save it coming back to Cabinet. Again, clearly, you know, there's been a number of supportive endorsements from local people, and we don't envisage that there will be any problems with the final statutory consultation. So subject to there being no further objections received during that period, we'd like to ask that delegated authority be given to the Strategic Director, please.
Okay, so if there's no more questions or comments, I shall put that to Cabinet. All those in favour of recommendations as set out by Councillor Russell, please show. Great, lovely, that's agreed. Item 9 then, some really good news from Councillor Bolton in terms of the our recent Ofsted inspection. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is with pleasure that we officially announce, although it was done in June, this is the first opportunity we've had to bring it to Cabinet, whilst it was recognised by the Mayor at the last Council meeting. Nevertheless, this is the first time we've had a look at the report in depth, along with the recommendations that have to be submitted back to Ofsted by the end of this month. We received excellent results, as we know. 3 goods, 1 outstanding, and a requires improvement. The requires improvement was something that wasn't a surprise to us, because our own self-assessment that we did showed us where our weaknesses were, and we were already working on them. And I think what the Ofsted inspectors were impressed with was that we know ourselves, we know what we're good at, we know where we need to improve, and we know the issues that we need to address in a more detailed level. However, we need to, and you'll see from the report, the recommendations on page 7 that the Ofsted inspectors asked us to work on and submit our action plan by the end of this month. However, I think if you look at the 4.3 on page 4 of this report, you'll see the key messages from the inspection, in that children and young people in our city are kept safe. Derby has a well-established early help service, which we as a council and a cabinet are continuing to provide. We have kept our 17 children's centres in operation. Whilst we've reconfigured 7, we have still maintained the 17 buildings. We have not closed any. So families and parents and carers who need the support in the community have it. Going on further down the list, our adoption service is good. Our care leavers services are good. And I'm sure every councillor in this chamber this evening is reassured by the results we had. I have had a letter from Dame Margaret Beckett congratulating us on this outcome. And I think really we need to thank everybody involved. All the staff have been thanked personally by Andy Smith and myself. We've had events to thank them. We've had meetings with our key partner agencies that are mentioned in this report. And quite clearly, the Derby Safeguarding Children's Board got an outstanding. And I think that shows that we do work together with all the partner agencies, and every topic is scrutinised. The various working groups that are set up throughout that board do scrutinise every element. So I personally thank all our staff, the strategic director himself for his direction and guidance, knowing that Derby children are safe, and I think that is an accolade. We are not being complacent though, Chair. Clearly we do need to act on the recommendations as outlined on the page I referred to earlier. And you'll see from the documents, Appendix 3, it's in very, very much detail, and that's what we need to prove to Ofsted, that we do have an action plan and we are going to deal with all the recommendations that are outlined. One of the recommendations I'm dealing with myself, the final list of the 11, the Corporate Parenting Committee, we've already made changes on the way that we minute the details. What was questioned, I was put 3 times to the Ofsted inspector, was that we are not showing in our minutes of our meetings and evidencing the children's voice. Now that is being changed now. The Constitutional Service staff who support that meeting are now making more in-depth notes of what the Children in Care Council say to us and how we are going to be actioning what they say, proving that we are listening to the children in care in the city. So that's just one issue that I'm personally acted on already. There are several others that we are monitoring in our monthly safeguarding assurance meetings that the Chief Executive attends, as well as the Chair of the Derby Safeguarding Children's Board and Andy and the relevant Service Director. So The recommendations, I am confident that the action plan has got all the details included. It has been scrutinised twice already this week. Monday night I attended the CYP Scrutiny Board. Last night I attended the Executive Scrutiny Board. I can inform Cabinet that on page 4 of Appendix 3, the second item regarding the homelessness protocol, in the accountable officer column, there was no accountable officer. It says, as you see, all staff, but we are going to put the name of Andy Kaiser as the accountable officer. The CYP board, and I agreed with them, we need to put a named officer there who is accountable. So we will be adding the name Andrew Kaiser to that column. I'm confident that this report will be carried through. As I said earlier, we are not being complacent. We are continually looking to give a good service to the children and families in our city. And hopefully from good we will go to outstanding in all fields in not too many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Really is an excellent outcome, and I think all Cabinet members and members of the Council would wish to place on record our thanks and congratulations to you as the lead member, also to Andy Smith as the Strategic Director, and all of the Council staff that have been involved in this amazing achievement. It's not an easy task. As we know, Ofsted make their inspections tighter and more in depth, and fewer authorities get the higher grades each time, which is right, because that's about raising standards and expectations. So it's extremely pleasing to see that this authority has come through that inspection in such a good light, and that really is a reflection on our staff, and who work so hard under very difficult circumstances in many cases to provide such an excellent service to children and young people in the city. So I would like our thanks recorded for all their efforts, and for this really outstanding achievement. Are there any other questions or comments that members would like to raise? Yes.
I firstly just wanted to say it is a brilliant achievement that the council has been able to receive from Ofsted, but I just wanted to ask, how often do Ofsted do their inspections, and are the results from this current inspection very different from the last, or are we improving or maintaining a high standard?
Thank you for that question. Councillor Bolton's going to respond to.
Thank you for the question. The answer is every 3 years, but clearly sometimes the goalposts change and the framework changes, but at the moment it is every 3 years. Because we have got a good, then they will not come into the authority, we hope, for another 3 years.
Thank you. So again, with our thanks to all members of staff and to Councillor Bolton and Andy recorded, Cabinet happy to approve the recommendations 2.1 to 2.3 in the report. Yeah, that's agreed. Thank you. Moving then to agenda item 10, and that's the purchase of residential properties. Councillor Hussain.
Chair, we have a welcome opportunity to acquire 5 new builds after plan. And I think the price that we've agreed with the developer is very, very competitive. It just shows that our officers are very proactive in looking for opportunities. And I've been looking at the scrutiny board's recommendation, although they've endorsed the report, but they have raised some issues. And it's important to understand that we do have a facilitation role as well as the role of being a housing provider. Our officers proactively check where planning permission has been granted as to why the development work hasn't started. And if they can clear any hitches, they do that. I think this came about as a result of us proactively ringing to see why the planning work hadn't been acted upon and why the development hadn't started. And maybe in this case, although we are getting very good value for money, the cost that we are purchasing these properties at is very similar to when Derby Homes build homes for us, when we offer the land for free. And the cost is very, very similar to what it would cost us to build on a land that has been thrown in as part of the development. So I welcome this, and we should accept the recommendations listed at 3.1 and 3.2.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. We will be returning, I think, to this item 17 in the pink papers to consider in more detail the confidential elements. We'll note those recommendations for the time being. I've got Councillor Holmes, who's indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I obviously accept the focus on affordable housing, I think it may be time to start looking at a dual approach, or at least considering the options, because as we know, I believe that the Derby City Council have a lower than average banding in terms of council tax than some of the comparable authorities. So it was just a thought as to whether the administration is minded to look at obviously retaining the affordable housing focus, but also maybe considering some more expensive properties within the city's footprint. Obviously, a lot of the new housing developments that would tend to go into the higher bands are going to be built on the edge of the city and not within it. It may be time to look at a strategy to consider that as well as alongside in parallel to the affordable housing projects.
Thank you. I'll let Councillor Hussain reply to that one then.
I think it's a fair point, but you'd have to take into consideration the location of the site. On a particular location, no matter how much money you spend in building it, 4 or 5 bedroom house, but you'd have to look at whether there would be any potential purchasers. For example, if the developer had spent 250,000 or 300,000, the council would probably not have been in a position to offer that sort of money. It all depends. And luxury homes to an extent are actually driven by the market. And if the location is right and the developer feels they can spend £300,000 on building it and other costs because they think they can expect £450 then that would be the case. On this particular site, I think the opportunity for us to even argue out a case for having that sort of development would have been minimal.
Chair, it's fair to say it wasn't specifically aimed at this particular item, it was just in general. I think we do need to be looking at it.
Thank you. I'm sure Councillor Hussain will take that on board. Next, Councillor Graves, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's an excellent idea that we are purchasing and council housing and adding to our stock. I think it's a very worthwhile thing. I did have a query on some of the detail of this, and the detail that I had a query on is that we're borrowing money over a 50-year period, and there's only protection in there for 15 years, and I wondered whether that risk strategy was adequate.
If Mark wants to.
I can, Chair. Although there is a risk, Ian Folger yesterday to Executive Scrutiny Board demonstrated that that risk is low, The level of right to buy properties in our social housing estate is low and manageable. And I can't remember the exact percentage, but I'm sure we can provide it for you, that risk is manageable. So it may well be that within those 5 years, we might have 1 or 2 right to buys across the estate. But over the 20, 30 years, that's probably slightly raised. We can't prevent residents exercising their right to buy, but it does require them to raise finance, and the fact they're in social housing normally means that they're having difficulties generating the kind of cash to acquire their own homes. But this gives an option for residents to at least aspire to their own ownership at some point in time. But as I say, the risk is fairly small, so across the total portfolio, we can manage that risk within the HRA.
Okay, thank you. If there's no more questions or comments on that, the recommendation from the Executive Scrutiny Board is that they support the proposals. In terms of recommendations 2.1 to 2.2, if I can just ask for show of support from those from Cabinet, and then, as I say, we'll return again at item 17 in the confidential section. Moving then to item 11, this is the Derby Silt Mill redevelopment, lease and external funding arrangements. Councillor Raju.
Thank you, Chair. So this report's about the transformation of the Silt Mill into an inspirational museum of making. The redevelopment of the Silt Mill contributes to one of the Council's pledges, which is to support Derby museums, galleries and key cultural partners, provide a vibrant leisure and cultural offer across the city. The Museums Trust has secured significant in-principle funding from both the Heritage Lottery Fund and the Arts Council combined to the amount of 11.9 million, as well as the 4 million secured by the Council, 3.7 of which comes from the Local Growth Fund. Both the Arts Council and the Heritage Lottery Fund have conditions attached to their funding which are quite standard in these cases relating to the Museums Trust lease arrangements for the Silt Mill. And that requires any new lease to be issued for a minimum term of 20 years beyond the completion of the redevelopment works. So the Council's legal section will be involved extensively in the issuing of any new lease and any ancillary documentation. The report recommends the approval to grant the new lease and all ancillary documentation necessary to satisfy the requirement of both those funders. Happy to take any questions from anyone.
Councillor Holmes, please.
Yeah, it was the Scrutiny Board last night. I think everyone was really excited about this prospect, and I think the insurance side of things came up because we learnt that a Trent 1000 engine, which is being kindly gifted by Rolls-Royce, was worth circa £22 million just on its own. And I think that's the debate went on to say, well, if it's worth that, then have we got everything in place in terms of insurance? But that is going to be fantastic, and I think everybody in the city is going to be really looking forward to having a look at that.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. I'm sure we'll make sure that the insurance is appropriate for the very expensive jet engine. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is really good news. It puts in place the arrangements really that are going to allow and facilitate the transformation of the Silt Mill, and this funding comes from a number of sources, and it's really pleasing to see this project coming together and really moving forward. So I'm sure there'll be widespread support for taking this project forward. If there's no further questions, Scrutiny Board, as Councillor Holmes says, we're happy with the recommendations subject to the issue of the insurance of the Rolls-Royce engine. And if there's no other questions, can Cabinet members, moved by Councillor Bolton, everyone who is in agreement please show. That is approved. Thank you very much. Item 12 is budget outturn quarter 1, and Councillor Shanker.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the budget outturn for the current financial year, and it's the quarter 1 position. I hope the style of the report members like. We've tried to simplify the information. There's a summary at 1.1. The recommendations are listed from 2.1 to 2.8, and then there's detailed analysis from 4.1 onwards. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, all the figures and information in there, so I move it for Cabinet approval.
Thank you. Any questions? First, Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's been a lot of debate, I think, well, there was some debate in scrutiny last night, and certainly I've been discussing it with my deputy leader and others within my group about the budget process. No one's saying that it isn't going to be challenging for the administration. We're going to also approach it to see what we can bring to the table. I believe that currently there's around £3.5 million pressure that needs to be resolved. But I'd like to just talk about the leisure and culture, the leisure strategy, because I've said this before, if I just take that as an example, there's a lot of detail within and assumptions within the medium-term financial plan that assume, for example, the arena to be running without subsidy, etc., etc. Now, it's my understanding, you may be able to clear this up, that it's probably likely that those facilities and other potential options aren't going to be taken, and it will probably stay within council ownership or management, if you like. And that, as an example, could have or will have an impact on the medium-term financial plan, where budgets have been set, savings have been projected that won't be potentially now achieved. So I just wanted to know if I give you that as an example, how the administration is approaching it.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. I think it's fair to say that there will be a number of areas that will need to be reviewed again as part of the budget process this year. The report sets out where not all targets have been achieved, and there are one or two of those, and what action is being taken to address that. So that will be a consideration as part of the ongoing budget process. There is a piece of work specifically ongoing about the leisure strategy, which the Cabinet member is leading on, and that will be coming back to Cabinet in due course. I don't know if Councillor Shanker or Mark want to add anything further in terms of the budget process for this year.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, I'd just like to say I welcome Councillor Holmes' recognition that in the past maybe the administration and opposition parties haven't worked closely enough, or they've not contributed enough to the overall budget process. So if that's an offer to be more involved, I welcome that, and it will be good for the council moving forward. I'd just like to stress again, this is the outturn position for quarter 1, so there'll be a number of areas where the budget isn't quite sufficient, or there is underspends and overspends, and that's, as part of the usual annual budget process where you'll keep an eye on, and where savings aren't being met, alternatives will be found by officers, so we deliver a balanced budget by year end, and we'll keep an eye on that, and there'll be a detailed report coming back in quarter 2 and quarter 3 to help us keep on track of the budget.
Thank you. Hopefully that answers those points, Councillor Holmes. Anything further on item 12 then? As Shanker says, it's there in the report. The Executive Scrutiny Board resolved to note the report and continue to monitor budget outturn at quarter 2, so scrutiny will continue to keep an eye on things. So I can just ask Cabinet to show your support for recommendations 2.1 to 2.8. Thank you. That's agreed. Chair, I'll hand over to Councillor Banwaite now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next on to agenda item number 13, over to the Cabinet Member for Finance and Governance.
Thank you. So this report covers our Q1 performance indicators. The report presents performance highlights from April to June this year, including progress against the Cabinet pledges in the Council's delivery plan. I'm pleased to say that 47 out of our 50 pledges are on track or have been completed, and actions are in place to address the 3 areas which are amber. The Council scorecard has been refreshed for this new municipal year and now includes 46 measures reflecting the safe, strong and ambitious priorities in our 15-year vision and important indicators for us to monitor as a resilient Council. At the end of Q1, 74% of measures are on track to achieve year-end targets. Areas of strong performance are highlighted at paragraph 4.17 of the report, and areas for attention are noted at 4.21. I recommend the report as printed, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Average working days per employee lost through sickness absence. It's currently 12. That's high, isn't it? I mean, does it normally peak and then go down towards the target? It's saying improving. Could you just have an officer's view on where we are with that?
It is high. It's an area that we're focusing on. It was in fact higher at the end of last year. It was 14.2, so we are going in the right direction. There are a number of proactive elements we're putting in place in terms of dealing with sickness absence. Clearly there will be some members of our staff that are suffering serious conditions. We are an ageing workforce. There is a natural drive in terms of the increased levels of sickness, and you're seeing that across the country. But we have got a strong focus on that. Our levels are high and we are trying to bring them down, but we obviously need to do that in a sensitive way through occupational health, through dealing with the underlying issues that are driving that sickness level. But nonetheless, it is a target for us to bring down. Yes, it is high at the moment.
Councillor Bolton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on what Councillor Shanker echoed in his presentation, under 4.8, it does say that 3 pledges have minor slippage. As I reported last night at the Scrutiny Board, I'm going to be open and honest here tonight at Cabinet. On page 11 of the document, a pledge within my portfolio is listed as amber, which is the minor slippage that Councillor Shanker referred to. It is unfortunate that one of our children's homes was Ofsteded and 402 Sinfin Lane was judged to be requiring improvement. However, 2 other of our homes, Bute Walk and Coronation Avenue, were Ofsteded recently and they remain as good. As members will know, we've got 7 children's homes in the city. It is regrettable that 1 is now in requiring improvement, but there has been a comprehensive improvement plan put in place. Some of the recommendations have already been actioned. There are some actions that are taking place ready for Ofsted to re-inspect the home, but I am confident, as is the Strategic Director, that these matters will be resolved and hopefully we will be judged as good next time.
Okay, any other questions, contributions from anyone? Okay, thank you. Can I have Cabinet to approve the report? Okay, show of hands please, thank you. Agenda item number 14, the Contract of Financial Procedures Matters Report, over to Councillor Shanker, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A routine but very important report concerning our contract and financial procedure matters. So in 1.1 there's a summary of a number of bid submissions that we are making or where we've received grants to formalise the process to accept those grants. They're listed at 1.1. The recommendations are at 2.1, and following yesterday's scrutiny meeting, an additional report has been prepared in relation to the £300,000 required at the cattle market. That's an exempt report which we'll discuss later in the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that, I'm not going to stamp over the pink papers because obviously we're going to have a discussion in private on that, but I think just to carry on from that, it would have been far better to have the pink papers at scrutiny last night. I think there was some confusion over the wording. Probably the wording could have been had more clarity whilst retaining the sensitive information in pinks. But I think that's really a lesson to learn from the future, is ensuring to be open and transparent within the scrutiny. We spent a good 25 minutes when we probably didn't need to. And the wording as well in the white paper probably could have been a little bit more specific, rather than how it's written that makes some assumptions unless it's obviously described to you in a certain way and then you understand it.
Okay, any other questions, contributions from anyone? Okay, so Cabinet to approve the recommendations set out in the report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, that's okay. Agenda item number 15, over to Councillor Afzal, please.
Thank you. The Council is delivering on its pledge to make Derby the cleanest city within 4 years, Chair. We are targeting key areas of the city which have been blighted by fly tipping, littering and bins left on the street for far too long. Enforcement activity has actually resulted in clear improvement to the areas targeted. We want to maintain those improvements whilst also expanding our approach to other hotspot areas. Our public protection officers are talking to residents on the doorstep and encouraging people to work together to improve their communities. So we recognise that the majority of residents in these areas, Chair, they're disgusted by those who choose to fly tip and litter. These measures are designed to target those who refuse to take their responsibility seriously. So to date, I've got an update figure, apart from the one in the report. The latest figures are that the Public Protection Enforcement Officers have issued 58 fixed penalty notices for littering, 31 for fly tipping, fixed penalty notices, 600 Section 46 notices, 8 community protection notice warnings for bin breaches, and 2 community protection notices for bin breaches. So I think it's a success story, and it's quite clear that we're going in the right direction. It is a pledge we've made. It was challenging, and I think talking to the local residents and the local people and the sense of responsibility and the communities coming together were making a massive difference. And to be honest with you, it's exceeded my expectations. So I move recommendations 2.1 and 2.2 as printed. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any questions, contributions from anyone? Councillor Holmes, please.
Credit where credit's due is something which we've been calling on for you to do, and you've done it. In terms of amendments in the budget and cabinet member questions and various other things over the last few years, you know that as an opposition we've been pressing for this. We felt that tough action, zero tolerance was always the way to go. And we watch it with interest. I think it would be interesting to just have a clarification, because there was a suggestion last night that the number of officers had been reduced from 5 to 4 for some reason. Whether that's the case or not, I think we should try and keep the levels up. But also there was a suggestion as well to ensure that we start looking at Derby City officers or people within the council that we can train to do this so that we can push forward.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. It's interesting. Everything positive we do, it always seems to be your suggestion, but thanks anyway. I'm glad you approve of something we're doing, but it's a step in the right direction. We've listened to our residents. We do regular council and patrol sessions. We have conversations with our residents, and I think one of the main things that people of Derby want is a cleaner city, and we're the ones who've actually given one of our 50 pledges to do that. And now you want to work collaboratively with us, and I welcome that, so thank you very much.
The Tories seem to remind you of that. You know that kid at school that never comes up with any ideas themselves, but always takes credit for everything. Oh, that was my idea. I had this idea the other day. I didn't share it with anybody, but it was just a big secret. You know, yeah, so it's just typical, isn't it? But we've seen those kind of people before, haven't we? I don't know what they're doing now, but Councillor Holmes was clearly one of them. Councillor Skelton, please.
Right. Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is very welcome indeed. I think people have been crying out for this kind of action for a long time. It's good to see that the message is getting through to people that dumping stuff on the street is not acceptable. I have just one query. Has there been any indication from what's been seen sort of in other parts of the city as to whether there's been any displacement of dumped items into the non-target area at all?
Not that we're aware of, Councillor Skelton.
Okay, any other contributions? Okay, so Cabinet to approve the report, approve the pilot scheme and the recommendations, and we're also happy to support the recommendations from review and scrutiny. Okay, so Cabinet to approve the recommendations. Show of hands, thank you. Okay, so agenda item number 16. There are no, just members of the public here. So just ask. There's no press here. No, there's no press.
Public upstairs.
Yeah. Do you want me to? Yes. So exclusion. Exclusion of public. Exclusion of press and public. To consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following item, that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following item on the grounds that involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 and schedule 12A of the Act, and the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. They like the sound of my voice, obviously.